Welcome to Inside American Politics. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're pulling back the curtain on one of American history's most fascinating and misunderstood figures, Mary Todd Lincoln. While Abraham Lincoln's story has been told countless times, Mary's journey remains shrouded in mystery, controversy, and frankly, a lot of unfair judgment. Today we're going to explore the real Mary Lincoln, not the caricature painted by hostile observers, but the complex woman who navigated the treacherous waters of 19th century politics, society, and personal tragedy. From her shocking transition from Southern belle to frontier wife, to her cunning manipulations of White House finances, to her fierce competition with Washington's social elite, this is Mary's story, told through her own words and actions. So settle in, because we're about to discover why Mary Todd Lincoln was perhaps the most underestimated woman in American political history. Dig deeper than the headlines with Inside American Politics, exclusively on Skoob. Go beyond sound bites and breaking news to uncover the real stories behind America's defining political moments. Inside American Politics takes you behind the scenes of landmark legislation, fierce debates, and cultural turning points that have shaped the nation's identity. Whether you're fascinated by presidential power plays, grassroots activism, or the backroom deals that changed everything, Inside American Politics brings it all to life with clarity and punch. Download Skoob now from the App Store or Play Store and dive into the story behind the system. Now picture this. You're Mary Todd, raised in a Kentucky mansion where enslaved people handle every aspect of daily life. You've never cooked a meal, never scrubbed a floor, never chopped wood or pumped water from a well. Your biggest worry is which dress to wear to your next dinner party. Then you marry Abraham Lincoln. Suddenly you're living in a modest wooden house at 8th and Jackson Streets in Springfield, Illinois, and reality hits like a thunderbolt. While Abraham feared marriage might impede his career, those fears proved completely groundless. He continued reading, studying, traveling the legal circuit, and pursuing politics with Mary's full support. But for Mary, everything changed overnight. The contrast was stark and brutal. While Lincoln's future political rivals lived in comfort, Julia Coulter married Edward Bates, whose 20 slaves handled nursing, cooking, and cleaning. Mary was alone, managing a household on Lincoln's meager earnings. Even after Bates freed his slaves in the 1850s, many stayed as paid workers, supplemented by immigrant help from St. Louis. Frances Seward never shouldered household burdens alone, living on her father's expansive Auburn estate with inherited domestic staff, and later enjoying full household staff as a governor's wife. But Mary and Lincoln had chosen a different path. They'd created something resembling a nuclear family, unusual for mid-19th century America, where extended family units were the norm. This independence came at a cost. When Lincoln traveled for business, Mary faced her demons alone, her fear of thunderstorms, anxiety over their children's health, and bouts of depression that would plague her throughout her life. Pride prevented her from seeking help from her Springfield sisters, who had disapproved of her marriage choice anyway. Meanwhile, Frances Seward thrived among 3 generations of women, her father, favorite aunt, sister, and daughter, all under one roof. Julia Bates enjoyed an extensive family circle with children, parents, siblings, and her mother-in-law nearby, providing the companionship and assistance that Mary desperately lacked. This isolation would shape Mary's character profoundly. She learned to be resourceful, independent, and fiercely protective of her family's interests, qualities that would serve her well in the political arena, but also contribute to her reputation as difficult and demanding. Fast forward to 1860, and Mary Todd Lincoln was finally tasting the success she'd long craved. Her home bustled with visitors eager for a glimpse of the woman connected to the potential next president. Artists clamored to paint her husband's portrait, and influential politicians sought audiences with the presidential nominee. Mary savored every moment of this newfound prominence, particularly enjoying the schadenfreude of watching Stephen Douglas struggle. When Douglas held a reception in Springfield that attracted only 30 attendees instead of the expected hundreds, Mary couldn't resist telling a friend, "This rather looks as if his greatness had passed away." But beneath this triumph lay deep anxiety. Despite all the attention and acclaim, Mary lived in constant fear that success might slip through their fingers. In a revealing moment of vulnerability, she confided to her friend Hannah Shearer, "You used to be worried that I took politics so coolly. You would not do so were you to see me now. My mind is sufficiently exercised for my comfort. I scarcely know how I would bear up under defeat. I trust that we will not have the trial." This anxiety wasn't entirely unfounded. While the Lincolns maintained cautious optimism, Stephen Douglas was making history as the first presidential candidate to campaign extensively in person, crisscrossing the nation from New England to the South. When Douglas received news of Republican victories in Indiana and Pennsylvania, he acknowledged reality. "Mr. Lincoln is the next president. We must try to save the Union. I will go south." What Mary and many Republicans failed to fully grasp was the gravity of Southern secession threats. Historian Alan Nevins would later praise Douglas for recognizing this danger, calling his efforts to preserve the Union his finest hour. Republicans, including Lincoln, largely dismissed Southern threats as political theater, a political game of bluff, as Lincoln described it to a journalist friend. Charles Francis Adams Jr. later admitted, "We all dwelt in a fool's paradise." But not Mary. Her anxiety proved prescient. She understood, perhaps better than her husband, that their victory would come at an enormous cost, one that would test not just their marriage, but the very fabric of the nation. Before we dive into the White House years, let's pause to explore something truly rare: actual correspondence between Abraham and Mary Lincoln. These letters, written during a separation in 1848, provide virtually our only direct window into their relationship, free from the hostile observations of outsiders who questioned Mary's suitability as Lincoln's partner. In April 1848, Lincoln wrote to Mary with touching honesty, "In this troublesome world, we are never quite satisfied. When you were here, I thought you hindered me some in attending to business, but now, having nothing but business, no variety, it has grown exceedingly tasteless to me. I hate to stay in this old room by myself." This wasn't the cold, distant husband often portrayed by critics. This was a man missing his wife desperately, sharing his pride in purchasing items for their children, appreciating her letters, and even teasing her playfully about her improved health. "Are you now feeling so well and fat and young as to be wanting to marry again?" Mary's response, written on a Saturday night after putting the children to bed, reveals her tender side. "How much I wish instead of writing we were together this evening. I feel very sad away from you." She shared details about their children's activities and even engaged in their old flirtation games, mentioning teasingly that Mr. Webb, a former suitor, planned to visit Shelbyville, Kentucky. These letters burst with life, discussions of friends and acquaintances in Washington and Springfield, detailed updates about their children, references to Lincoln's political affairs, gentle humor, and most importantly, mutual yearning for each other's company. Mary reassured Abraham that the children have not forgotten Pa, describing how little Eddie's eyes brightened at mention of his father's name. Lincoln's quick reply focused on her desire to return. "Will you be a good girl in all things if I consent?" he asked playfully, likely referring to her struggles with other boarders and her dissatisfaction with his workload. "Come along, and that as soon as possible. Having got the idea in my head, I shall be impatient till I see you." These weren't the writings of a troubled marriage, but of two people deeply connected, sharing the joys and challenges of their life together. By fall 1848, Mary and the children had reunited with Lincoln in Washington, their correspondence having bridged the gap until they could be together again. Now we enter the glittering, cutthroat world of Washington society, where Mary Lincoln faced her most formidable rival, Kate Chase, daughter of Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase. This wasn't just social competition, it was political warfare disguised as dinner parties and receptions. When British journalist William Russell first encountered the key players at a White House reception in March 1861, the battle lines were already drawn. Russell had come to leverage Secretary of State William Seward's influence. Seward was renowned as the president's confidant and wielded significant political power. At 41, Russell was an energetic, bespectacled Englishman who'd gained fame covering the Crimean War. At the Lincolns' first state dinner, Russell observed the competing forces. He described Mary as having plain features and a somewhat rigid demeanor, marked by frequent use of "sir," which he attributed to her conscious effort to transcend her past as simply the wife of an Illinois lawyer. Mary was already seated to welcome guests, maintaining the formal protocol expected of a first lady. But then Russell encountered Kate Chase, and the contrast was striking. He described her as very attractive, engaging, and lively, conducting herself with remarkable poise and speaking in a soft, harmonious voice. Her posture and facial expression evoked the air of an English noblewoman being painted by Gainsborough or Reynolds in a formal garden. As hostess for her father, Kate held a unique position in Washington's official social hierarchy, rivaled only by Mary Lincoln since neither Ellen Hamlin nor Frances Seward sought social prominence. But Kate wasn't just competing, she was dominating. As one of her close friends later told the Cincinnati Enquirer, Kate was the queen of society, captivating men with her personal allure and charisma, to the point where they figuratively knelt before her. The rivalry crystallized in an anecdote, possibly exaggerated but revealing nonetheless. After Mary expressed her intention to see Kate in the future, Kate reportedly responded with a poised invitation for Mary to visit her at any time. The implied message was clear: Kate would receive Mary as a guest, not as an equal. Meanwhile, Kate was busy outfitting her father's impressive 3-story brick mansion at 6th and E Street Northwest. Despite Chase's constant financial concerns, he recognized the importance of maintaining an elegant residence to entertain senators, congressmen, diplomats, and generals, building alliances for his future presidential ambitions. The house lease cost $1,200 annually, and furnishing expenses mounted alarmingly. Chase struggled to sell his Ohio properties due to the languishing real estate market and had to borrow $10,000 from Hiram Barney, technically his subordinate as collector of customs in New York. This must have been uncomfortable for the morally rigid Chase, but he justified the expense, believing someone who had served the public deserved a distinguished home. Kate traveled to New York and Philadelphia to purchase high-quality carpets, draperies, and furniture. With 6 servants, the house became an ideal venue for hosting gatherings that rivaled anything the White House could offer. The competition was fierce, personal, and ultimately, it would drive Mary to extraordinary lengths to maintain her position as Washington's premier hostess. Now we come to perhaps the most scandalous aspect of Mary Lincoln's White House years, her manipulation of the renovation budget that would make modern political scandals look tame by comparison. This is where Mary's resourcefulness, honed during those difficult early married years, transformed into something far more complex and morally questionable. Mary arrived at a White House that was, frankly, a disgrace. Elizabeth Grimsley was astonished at the dismal condition of the family apartments, furnished with what appeared to be relics from George Washington's era. The public spaces were equally depressing: faded, tobacco-stained rugs, torn curtains, and dilapidated chairs. The entire residence resembled an outdated, unsuccessful hotel rather than the esteemed residence of the nation's leader. For Mary, this presented the perfect opportunity to pursue a significant ambition, restoring the residence to its former grandeur as a testament to her husband's strength and the power of the Union. But timing, as they say, is everything, and Mary's timing was catastrophically wrong. In the midst of a devastating civil war, such aspirations appeared frivolous rather than patriotic. In mid-May, Mary embarked on a shopping excursion to Philadelphia and New York with Elizabeth Grimsley and William Wood, the Commissioner of Public Buildings. She discovered that each president received a $20,000 stipend for White House upkeep, and she intended to make every penny count. The shopping spree was legendary. Mary acquired new furniture, luxurious curtains, and plush carpets to replace the worn items in public rooms. For the state guest room, she purchased what would become known as the Lincoln bed, a grand 8-foot-long rosewood bed with an intricately carved headboard adorned with exotic birds, grapevines, and clusters of grapes. The stores, eager to extend credit to the First Lady, allowed her to purchase with abandon. But the press exaggerated her spree, reporting she'd spent thousands in stores she hadn't even visited. Despite the exaggerations, Mary returned with substantial bills: $7,500 for curtain materials and trimmings, $900 for a new carriage, and much more. Then came the reckoning. As financial statements rolled in, Mary realized she'd exceeded her $20,000 budget by over $6,800. Terrified of disappointing Abraham, she became a master manipulator, cleverly persuading John Watt, the White House groundskeeper, to manipulate his expense reports and secretly route additional funds to her. Previously, she'd replaced her initial commissioner of public buildings because he'd refused her request to cover an extravagant White House dinner from the manure budget. Let that sink in. She wanted to fund entertainment from the gardening budget. When that failed, she utilized political influence to negotiate lower bills and accepted gifts from wealthy benefactors. Her manipulation extended to White House staff. She asked John Hay to allocate the stationery fund for her expenses and later requested payment as the White House steward. Hay, exasperated, mentioned to Nicolay that he'd essentially told her to kiss mine in response to her demands. Mary was outraged and attempted to have Hay dismissed, destroying any goodwill between them. But Mary's resourcefulness had limits. Just before New Year's Eve, more invoices arrived while funds were depleted. With no options left, she confessed to Abraham, pleading with him to request additional funding. She enlisted Benjamin French, the newly appointed Commissioner of Public Buildings, to discuss the matter with the president. French approached Lincoln shortly after he'd returned from a Senate memorial service for Edward Baker. The contrast between heartfelt tributes to his old friend and this distasteful subject triggered an atypical outburst from Lincoln. French recalled the president's firm stance. Lincoln declared it would be disgraceful for people to think an appropriation of $20,000 for furnishing the house was exceeded by the president when destitute soldiers were deprived of blankets. "I'll be damned if I'll sanction the bills for frivolous embellishments for that damned old house," Lincoln exploded. He remarked angrily that the residence was already better furnished than any home they'd previously occupied, and he'd rather pay from his own funds than attach his name to such a bill. Despite Lincoln's fury, French was determined to support Mary. Impressed by her character, he vowed to defend her against criticism, describing her as an admirable woman with the demeanor of a lady. French ultimately succeeded in persuading a sympathetic congressman to discreetly incorporate a deficiency appropriation into a complex military funding bill. The crisis was temporarily resolved, but Mary's spending continued, leading to another round of bills and another cycle of manipulation. This pattern would define much of her White House tenure: grand ambitions, financial overreach, creative manipulation, and ultimate rescue through political maneuvering. American politics isn't just about elections and headlines. It's the evolving story of ideals, conflicts, breakthroughs, and the people who drive them. From legendary leaders to everyday changemakers, it's a complex journey shaped by bold moves, quiet decisions, and moments the cameras often miss. When you look closer, you uncover twists, turning points, and stories that still define the country today. Follow, like, and subscribe to Inside American Politics by Skoob on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and see American history and power through a whole new lens. As we near the end of Mary's story, we encounter perhaps her most human and relatable chapter, her time at the soldier's home, where grief, healing, and simple human connection converged during the darkest period of her life. By summer, after enduring relentless strain and the devastating loss of their son Willie, President Lincoln and his family desperately needed refuge. Mary, weighed down by grief, had been lost in deep depression for months. But slowly, observers noted her gradual return to normalcy as she began accompanying her husband during their late afternoon rides. Her presence was noted at Dr. Gurley's church services once again, though she remained discreet, obscured by her large black veil and mourning garments that made her nearly unrecognizable. Commissioner French observed that Mary appeared in much improved spirits as she prepared for the family's summer retreat to the soldier's home. This sanctuary was nestled on approximately 300 acres of hills, located about 3 miles north of the capital. Established in the 1850s as a haven for disabled veterans, the Soldiers' Home featured a main building for up to 150 residents, plus an infirmary, dining facility, and administrative offices. Several expansive cottages dotted the property, including the Anderson Cottage, the two-story brick house intended for the Lincoln family. This had once been the country residence of George Riggs, founder of Riggs Bank, before the federal government acquired it. President Buchanan had already established the precedent of using the Soldiers' Home as an escape from the city's suffocating summer heat. Surrounded by flourishing flowers, verdant shrubs, and towering trees, a visitor described the location as an earthly paradise. The immaculate gravel paths and winding carriage routes were open to the public and quickly became a popular retreat for Washingtonians seeking peaceful weekend excursions. A visitor in 1862 called it the most delightful spot in the capital, offering views of the cityscape including the incomplete Capitol Dome, a metaphor for the ongoing Civil War, the extensive Potomac River, and nearby locales like Alexandria, Arlington, and Georgetown. Mary urged her husband to embrace this retreat with their family for the summer, leading Lincoln to commute on horseback the 3 miles between the Soldiers' Home and the White House each day. Mary expressed her contentment to her friend Fanny Eames, enthusing about the enjoyable walks and drives, continuous visits, and especially the pleasure of having their son Robert home for vacation from Harvard. She dreaded his return to Cambridge, cherishing his company during this precious time. For their youngest son, Tad, who had been bereft of companionship after Willie's death and the absence of the Taft boys, the Soldiers' Home provided much-needed solace. His engaging personality endeared him to the soldiers charged with guarding his father, earning him the affectionate title of Third Lieutenant. They welcomed him into their drills during the day and shared their campfire meals with him at night. In the evenings, the Lincolns hosted gatherings on the extensive porch overlooking the scenic grounds, or in the gas-lit formal parlor. With slippers on his feet, Lincoln would entertain guests by reciting poetry or reading aloud from favorite authors. Despite the distant echo of cannon fire, this serene refuge offered invaluable privacy and facilitated meaningful exchanges among family and guests. Historian Matthew Pinsker noted that for Lincoln, the soldiers providing security recreated some of the camaraderie reminiscent of his early political career and tenure as a traveling lawyer in Illinois. But for Mary, the healing came through service to others. During this restorative period, Mary developed a routine of making daily visits to hospitals throughout the district. These hospitals became her sanctuary, offering temporary relief from personal grief. According to a friend who regularly accompanied her, Mary confessed that such compassionate acts were crucial to her emotional survival following Willie's death. Walt Whitman, who spent time nursing in the hospital wards, reflected on how witnessing the suffering and valor of countless young men, enduring horrific injuries and amputations without anesthetics, often dying without loved ones nearby, imbued him with a different perspective, causing everyday trivialities to pale into insignificance. For Mary, these visits provided something equally profound: purpose beyond her own pain, connection to others' suffering, and perhaps most importantly, a way to channel her nurturing instincts when her own family had been so cruelly diminished. As we conclude our journey through Mary Todd Lincoln's remarkable life, we're left with a complex portrait of a woman who defied every convention of her time. She was simultaneously vulnerable and manipulative, grieving and resilient, isolated and influential, traditional and revolutionary. Mary Lincoln was never the one-dimensional figure painted by hostile observers. She was a woman who transformed herself from a pampered Southern belle into a frontier wife, from a nervous political spouse into a formidable Washington hostess, from a grieving mother into a compassionate volunteer. Yes, she manipulated budgets and competed fiercely with social rivals. Yes, she could be demanding, difficult, and sometimes deceptive. But she was also a woman who supported her husband's career unconditionally, who found ways to survive in a world that offered her few acceptable outlets for her intelligence and ambition, and who channeled her pain into service to others. Perhaps most importantly, she was a woman who understood power, how to acquire it, wield it, and maintain it in a society that officially denied women any political role whatsoever. Her methods may have been controversial, but her instincts were often correct, and her influence on American history far greater than has been acknowledged. The next time someone dismisses Mary Todd Lincoln as merely difficult or unstable, remember the full story. Remember the woman who faced thunderstorms alone while her husband traveled, who competed with Washington's elite for her family's political future, who found creative solutions to impossible financial situations, and who ultimately discovered healing through helping others. Mary Todd Lincoln was not perfect, but she was undeniably powerful, resourceful, and far more complex than history has generally allowed. In many ways, she was the first modern political spouse, and perhaps that's exactly why she's been so misunderstood. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and you've been listening to Inside American Politics. Thanks for being here as we unpack the decisions, power dynamics, and behind-the-scenes moments that continue to shape the American political landscape. If today's episode gave you a new angle, challenged your thinking, or sparked your curiosity about how this country really works, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're tuning in. And if you're ready for more fast, thoughtful deep dives, covering everything from landmark legislation and political shakeups to the lesser-known figures who've left a lasting mark, check out Skoob, the AI-powered podcast studio. Download it now on the App Store or Play Store and experience American politics in a whole new way. Smarter, faster, and more compelling. Until next time, remember that behind every great man in history, there's often an even more fascinating woman whose story deserves to be told in full.